I grew cucumbers on the ground for over 15 years. The vines sprawled across whatever space I gave them. The fruit hid under the leaves and turned yellow before I found it. Production stopped every year by early August without fail. I assumed this was just how cucumbers grew in my climate. I assumed wrong. One change in how I managed the plant structure changed everything. Not a new fertilizer, not a new variety, not a new spray. The way I managed the physical structure of the vine. My plants now produce consistently from June through the first frost. I give away cucumbers every season because I cannot use everything my plants produce. That was never true when I grew on the ground. Two things I want you to stay for. First, there is a specific point on the cucumber vine where I stop pruning. Going past it reduces yield instead of improving it. Most pruning advice never mentions this point. I will explain exactly where it is and why it matters in the middle of this video. Second, there is something about harvest frequency that I eventually understood is actually a pruning decision. The most important one I make all season. I will explain that near the end. Stay for both. Let me start with what was actually happening to my ground sprawling plants in August. For years, I noticed the slowdown. July was good, August was not. I tried different varieties, thinking certain cucumbers were just shorter season plants. Same result across every variety I tested. I tried increasing water in late July. Same result. I tried more fertilizer going into August. Same result. It took me longer than it should have to connect the slowdown to something I was doing, or more accurately, something I was failing to notice. Every yellow cucumber on a vine is a seed-bearing fruit that has reached maturity. When a cucumber plant has a mature seed-bearing fruit on the vine, it receives a hormonal signal. The signal says the reproductive mission is complete. New flower production slows. Sometimes stops entirely. The plant begins directing its energy toward the mature seeds already on the vine rather than toward developing new fruit. One yellow cucumber left on the vine for a week can slow an entire plant's production dramatically. I was leaving multiple yellowed cucumbers on my ground sprawling plants without realizing it. They were hidden under the leaf canopy. By the time I found them, they were orange. The plant had already received the slowdown signal days earlier. I was wondering why my plants were stopping production, while the cause was sitting invisible on the ground beneath the leaves. The ground sprawling habit was the root of this problem. Fruit on the ground is hidden. Fruit on a trellis is visible. Every cucumber I grow now hangs in open air where I can see it from 6 feet away. I have not missed a cucumber at harvest since I moved to vertical growing. The harvest frequency understanding that came from this is something I want to come back to near the end. There is a dimension to it beyond what I just described. Stay for it. The structural change that makes all of this possible is the trellis. I want to explain exactly how I set mine up and why the height matters more than most people think about. I switched to vertical growing after a neighbor showed me a cucumber plant trained up a simple wire fence. His plant was producing visibly more fruit than anything I had grown in 15 years of ground sprawling. I went home and built my first trellis that same weekend. The trellis I use is 6 feet tall at minimum. Wire or strong netting with openings large enough for cucumbers to hang through freely without getting pinched, anchored firmly into the ground. A loaded cucumber trellis in July wind carries more weight than it looks like it should. I learned this after a trellis collapsed in my 3rd season of vertical growing and took 3 plants with it. I have anchored every trellis firmly since that afternoon. I train the main vine straight up. by loosely tying it to the trellis every 8 to 10 inches as it grows. Soft, natural twine only. Not wire, not plastic clips. Soft twine that can be adjusted as the stem thickens without cutting into the tissue. The height rule is not negotiable in my experience, 6 feet minimum. A trellis shorter than 6 feet fills up before the plant reaches its most productive phase. The upper portion of a vertically trained cucumber vine above 4 feet is where the plant produces its heaviest fruit load. Observed this pattern over multiple seasons by watching where on the trellis the most fruit was developing. The answer was consistently in the upper half. A short trellis cuts off access to the most productive zone. I space plants at 18 inches apart along the trellis. This keeps adjacent plants from creating the closed, humid microclimate between them that encourages the mildew problem I covered in the previous video. Now, the pruning. This is where I need to explain the specific point on the vine where I stop, because going past it is the mistake that most vertical cucumber growing advice leads gardeners directly into. A cucumber vine produces a main stem that grows upward and lateral shoots that emerge at every leaf junction along the main stem. These laterals are where the female flowers appear. Female flowers become cucumbers. The laterals are where the harvest lives. Most pruning advice says to remove the laterals to keep the plant tidy and focused on a single leader vine. This advice is partially right in one zone and completely wrong in another. Here is what I observed over several seasons of testing different approaches. Lateral shoots emerging from the main stem below node 4, the fourth leaf junction from the base of the plant, almost never produce female flowers. They produce male flowers only, or no flowers at all. They consume energy and root resources without contributing to harvest. Removing them redirects that energy to the upper fruiting zone where the harvest is actually happening. This is the correct pruning below node 4. Remove every lateral, every one. Above node 4, everything changes. The lateral shoots emerging from nodes 5 and above consistently produce female flowers and fruit. Removing them removes the harvest. I leave every lateral above node 4 to grow freely with one modification. I pinch only the growing tip of each lateral after it has produced 2 leaves and 1 flower cluster. This keeps the lateral from extending indefinitely and concentrates the plant's energy in the developing fruit on that lateral rather than continued extension of the shoot. This is the stop point I mentioned in the hook, node 4. Below it, remove all laterals cleanly. Above it, leave all laterals and pinch only their growing tips after the first flower cluster appears. That is the complete method. The mistake most pruning advice makes is recommending removal of all laterals to maintain a single leader vine. A single leader cucumber vine produces a fraction of what a vine with managed laterals above node 4 produces. I tested this directly. Single leader plants in one bed, managed lateral plants in the adjacent bed, identical variety, identical everything else. The managed lateral plants outproduced the single leader plants by a factor of roughly 3 across a full season. Not slightly more, 3 times the harvest from the same number of plants. I have not grown single leader cucumbers since that test. When the main vine reaches the top of the trellis, there is one more pruning decision. What to do at the top changes what happens in the final 6 weeks of the season. When the main vine reaches trellis height, I pinch the growing tip cleanly. 1 cut, 3 seconds. This stops upward extension and signals the plant to direct all remaining energy into the existing laterals and the fruit already developing on them. Most gardeners let the vine grow past the trellis and collapse back down. This creates a tangled mass that reduces air circulation, hides fruit, and makes the mildew problem almost guaranteed. The pinch at trellis height prevents all of that. After pinching the tip, I do a weekly check of the trellis. I remove any lateral that has extended more than 18 inches without producing a flower cluster. This occasionally happens on laterals that are in too much shade from adjacent growth. Those laterals are not contributing, and their removal opens up light and air for the ones that are. I remove yellowing lower leaves as they appear. They are no longer photosynthesizing effectively, and their removal improves air circulation at the base of the plant where disease pressure is highest. I do not fertilize after pinching the main tip. The plant's energy at this stage goes entirely into the fruit already on the vine. Additional fertilizer at this point encourages vegetative growth the plant no longer needs. Now, I want to come back to harvest frequency, because what I said earlier about picking every 2 days is only part of the picture. There is a second dimension to it that connects directly to everything else in this video. I think of harvest frequency as a pruning decision, not a consumption decision. Most gardeners harvest when they need cucumbers. I harvest on a schedule regardless of what I need. Here is why this matters structurally. A cucumber plant actively carrying 15 developing fruits is allocating its root system's output across 15 competing demands simultaneously. A plant carrying 7 developing fruits at one time allocates the same root output across 7 demands. Each fruit receives roughly twice the resources per fruit. By harvesting at eating stage every 2 days, rather than waiting until cucumbers are large, I keep the number of simultaneously developing fruits at a manageable level. Each fruit receives more resources during development. The result is consistent. Smaller, more frequent harvests produce cucumbers with thicker walls, more concentrated flavor, and smaller seeds than large, infrequent harvests from the same plant. I pick slicing varieties at 6 to 7 inches, not 8, not 9, 6 to 7 inches. At that size, the seeds inside are still immature and small, the wall is at its thickest relative to the overall size, and the flavor is at its peak. Left another 3 days, the cucumber grows to 9 inches. The seeds enlarge, the wall relatively thins, and the flavor weakens noticeably. 40 years of tasting cucumbers at different harvest stages taught me this. The 6-inch cucumber from my trellis is a different eating experience from the 9-inch cucumber I used to find on the ground. Not slightly better, genuinely different in texture, flavor, and seed size. Harvest frequency as a structural decision, not a convenience decision, is the last piece of this system. And it is the piece that most gardeners never consciously think about. Before I close, I want to be direct about what this system requires and where it does not apply. It requires a trellis, a one-time investment of time and materials that lasts multiple seasons but still requires building and anchoring before you plant. It requires consistent harvesting every 2 days during peak production. This is a genuine commitment. I keep a harvest basket at the end of my cucumber row and pick every morning as part of my daily garden walk. For gardeners who check their garden only on weekends, this system is harder to maintain. The missed harvests become yellow cucumbers on the trellis, and the slowdown I described earlier begins regardless of how well the pruning was done. It works best with vining cucumber varieties. Market more, straight 8, English cucumbers, Persian cucumbers. Bush cucumber varieties do not produce the long laterals this system depends on. Check what you planted before building a trellis and spending time on lateral management, and it requires patience in the first season. The pruning work feels counterintuitive when you are removing shoots that could extend and potentially produce fruit. The results in weeks 4 through 10 of the season justify every cut made in weeks 1 through 3. In my experience, the patience required in the early weeks is the main reason gardeners abandon vertical growing before they see what it produces. Stay with it through the establishment phase. The trellis pays for itself before August ends. Tell me in the comments what zone you garden in and how many cucumbers a single plant typically produces for you in a season. I want to know what you are starting from. I read every comment. Next video is about picking a ripe avocado. The color tells you almost nothing. The feel tells you something, but most people do it wrong and end up squeezing and bruising every avocado in the display looking for one that is ready. There is one check that takes 10 seconds and has not failed me in years. I have not bought a hard, disappointing avocado since I understood what to look for. That video is next. Subscribe. The button is right there. The knowledge is free.